Hey everyone, what's up? Yeah, it's about 101. I've got about 42 minutes remaining on my lunch. I do have to get something to eat, but before I clock in, so I'll take care of that in a moment. But I want to do an audio video here on something that I talked about at the MLP forums and the message board over at Equestria Daily. The topic I talked about was if the movie was to get a sequel, the upcoming My Little Pony movie, which comes out on Friday, which I hopefully will be able to see depending on some personal situations going on with my family and one of their jobs. That's all I'm going to say, basically. Basically, all I'm going to say is one of my family members has something going on that may or may not affect their job, but right now it looks like they're going to be okay. So just keep my family member in prayer and everything, that everything will be all right at their job. But anyway, I do plan, hopefully, to go see it this Friday. Now, with that said, the topic I brought up at both message boards, sorry about that, was if the movie gets a sequel, how should it be released, and what should it be about? Now, a lot of people have kind of mentioned that we'd have to first find out how the movie does in theaters, and right now the movie's getting mostly positive reviews, which I guess is kind of a surprise, because you look at it and you think there's no way a movie like this would get positive reviews, but it is getting positive reviews, and that's a good thing. That's a good sign, especially if a potential sequel could be done. Some others have mentioned that if a sequel is done, it'll be just like this movie. It'll be a standalone film. Well, let's take a look at this. Well, let's take a look at that for a moment. Everybody says it's a standalone film. That's true. But it's connected to but it's based on Friendship is Magic. In other words, if you add it's not just My Little Pony, the movie, it's My Little Pony Friendship is Magic, the movie. When you think about it. That's what it is. It's My Little Pony Friendship is Magic, the movie. And when you take a look at the connection it has to Season 8, and the fact that we're getting a Hippogriff Sea Pony in Season 8, yeah, I don't think it's just a standalone film. I think there's going to be connections between it and the upcoming season. However, with that said, some people have mentioned in response that if it was to get a sequel, that it would be in the same category as this, like its own standalone feature. It would be its own individual story, and that's about it. It would continue basically sort of the adventures that you got here. Now, some have agreed with my ideas of what potentially could happen, and some have kind of joked around of what they would like to see and whatnot. But when I mentioned this, when I basically asked if a sequel was to be made, how would it be released, and what should it be about, I wasn't doing it to joke around or anything. I was actually trying to bring up a realistic potentiality. Because like I said, with the positive reviews that the movie is getting right now from special screenings and early releases and all that, that in a sense is a good sign, because at least it shows that the movie potentially will succeed at the box office, despite it being released on a smaller amount of screens than the recent Lego Ninjago movie. So it still could exceed, if not overly exceed, expectations. Now, with that said, however, my question was, if one gets made, if a sequel to this gets made, how would it be released? What should it be about? And I brought up the fact that even though a second theatrical release for the sequel, in other words, a theatrical release for a potential sequel could happen, could be a reality, or could become a reality, I also pointed out that the most logical, if not realistic option that Hasbro and Lionsgate and DHX Media along with Toon Boom would probably go in is direct-to-video. Hear me out. There are a lot of live-action and animated films that did very well at the box office, had decent returns, made back the money that was spent on making the film a reality, but instead of releasing the sequel that it earned because of that in theaters, instead of releasing the sequel in theaters, studios opted to go the direct-to-video route. Why? Because even though they made the money back, if not broke even, and had a moderate, if not a little higher, if not a moderate, if not a more than successful run at the box office, they still opt to go for direct-to-video. Why? Because it's a cheaper option. You might say, well, they put in the same effort sometimes that they do with a theatrical movie, right? Yeah, they do. And the sequel does get released. Believe it or not, a sequel does get released in theaters at times, but if it's mostly a direct-to-video release, then that release in theaters is only for maybe 1 or 2 nights only. That's about it. Why? So that at least it can be said that it got a theatrical run, even for 1 night or 2 nights only. Now, the reason I point this out is because there have been a lot of movies, animated and live action, like I said, that got that direct-to-video treatment. Mostly animated at times. And you would think, well, wait a minute, the movie did so well, why doesn't it get a theatrical run? That's up to the studios. Now, for example, you take a look at The Lion King. The Lion King is one of the greatest animated films of all time, if not the greatest animated film of all time. And yet, instead of its movie getting instead of the sequel getting a theatrical release in 1998, instead it was sent direct to video. Why? Well, because Disney had decided it was cheaper, and I guess they didn't want to risk anything. However, the sequel proved to be the most successful direct-to-video. The sequel, however, proved to be the most successful direct-to-video movie, animated or live action, that had ever been released. So, for Disney, they made their money back even on a direct-to-video release. And it made people scratch their ears or scratch their heads and wonder, well, wait a minute. If people enjoyed this movie overall, just like they did the first one, and have said things that it's a worthy successor, then why wasn't it released in theaters? And again, I think the reason being is because Disney didn't want to chance it. Disney didn't want to chance it. In other words, Disney didn't want to chance the fact that even though the film proved to be a success and it spawned it spawned a prequel or a midquel, as I would call it, in The Lion King 1.5. Lion King 2, Simba's Pride, maybe in the eyes of Disney, may have not been well received in theaters as well as its predecessor. You know what I'm saying? In other words, they didn't want to chance the fact that it could bomb at the box office and not succeed like its predecessor did. Now, you might say, well, Disney and Pixar released the sequel to Toy Story 2 in theaters, and that was originally penned for direct-to-video. That's true, but here's why. Here's why they did that. They did it because of the fact that they saw the success that Lion King 2 had on home video, probably regretted putting Lion King 2 in theaters after they saw the success it had on home video, and decided, you know what, people like Toy Story just as much as they did The Lion King. It's one of the greatest animated films they've ever seen. It's a first in animation. So they probably decided, you know what, instead of releasing the sequel as a direct-to-video, let's try and do what we didn't do with The Lion King 2 and release it in theaters and see what happens. And lo and behold, what do you know? They ended up getting a huge successful return out of it because it became such a huge hit. That is what happened. That's why later on you saw some Disney Toon movies being released in theaters that was sequels to other Disney animated classics, like Return to Neverland, for example. Did you think that was going to be in theaters? No. Something like that is originally intended for theatrical release. For direct-to-video release. Not theatrical, but yet they did it because they saw the success with Toy Story 2 and thought maybe they could repeat that. Obviously, they were wrong, but at least they tried. They tried with other properties. They even tried with their one Saturday morning shows, giving them feature-length films in theaters, like Doug, like Recess, like Teacher's Pet. And some of them did prove to be successful, but not in the way they would hope. But yet, like I said, they proved enough to be successful that Disney did have mediocre success here and there with them. Which is why when Disney decides to take a chance, they will release a movie, a sequel, in theaters. A good example is the upcoming Wreck-It Ralph 2, Ralph Breaks the Internet, and Frozen 2. You would think these kinds should be direct-to-video, but because they were huge successes, they've decided, you know what, we're going to put them in theaters and see what happens. So sequels can succeed in theaters, there's no doubt about it. But, getting back on topic here with My Little Pony, the movie, if it gets a sequel, I'm not ruling out a theatrical run for the sequel. I wouldn't. Because that would be totally up to Lionsgate, DHX Media, Toon Boom, Allstar Pictures, Hasbro. It'd be totally up to them if a potential sequel got a theatrical release. It'd be up to them. But knowing Hasbro, like I probably do from my history as being someone that grew up with Hasbro, watching Transformers and G.I. Joe and all that, we may get a sequel to My Little Pony the movie, but we'll probably end up getting a direct-to-video release of it. That's just my theory. Because in the case of Hasbro, in the case of Hasbro as a business overall, they wouldn't want to risk, how do I put this? They wouldn't want to risk, a disappointing return, if not financial disaster at the box office with the sequel. They'd rather put the money into the sequel being a direct-to-video release. So, I know I got a little off topic a little bit, kind of rambled there, but the point is, it's up to Hasbro, Lionsgate, Allstar Pictures, DHX Media, and Toon Boom Harmony whether or not a potential sequel gets a theatrical release. Because, again, don't be surprised that if we get a sequel, that instead of being released theatrically, it's released only as a direct-to-video. Don't be surprised by that, because I won't. I won't be. I mean, you could potentially get a 1 or 2 night event theatrical run, a 1 or 2 night theatrical release, and that's about it. As a special event, thanks to Phantom Events. But, that's probably going to be about it. That's probably all you're going to get. You know what I'm saying? But my honest opinion, like I said, those message boards, is I'm not ruling out a theatrical run for a potential sequel. But I'm looking at it in a more realistic way, in a more logical way. And that more logical, realistic way would be for the sequel, if we get one, to be direct-to-video. That's how I look at it. Now, I know I rambled on about that for a little over 15 minutes, so I'm sorry about that. We are about at 16 minutes 26 seconds, or 27 anyway, or 28. 16 and a half minutes. But let's talk about potential story ideas. Now, like I said, some people did agree with my ideas. Some kind of joked around of what they would like to see. Some gave an idea of what they would like to see. But me, I came up with 4 scenarios, 4 potential ideas. And these 4 potential ideas, I think, are very reasonable. Now, some have disagreed with them, feeling that if we get any of these as a movie, they wouldn't be a sequel to this movie, but be their own deal. And that might be true, but I wouldn't put it past Hasbro or DHX Media to have the sequel to this film, if we get one, be one of these kind of stories. I wouldn't put it past them. For example, one of the ideas I came up with was we would finally, and I even put this in bold letters on the message boards, we would finally get a crossover between the Friendship is Magic main 6 or 7 and the Equestria Girls main 6 or 7. And the reason we'd finally get that crossover is to finally find out the connection between both worlds. Because think about it. If you watch Equestria Girls, if you are a fan of the movies, if you're a fan of them, you have to be asking yourself and wondering, why is magic from the Equestria Prime world, as I call it, the Friendship is Magic world, somehow seeping in to the Equestria human world? How is this happening? Shouldn't it be non-existent? What's going on? Why are 6, 7 students suddenly given these special abilities to where when they call upon these abilities, they become they become anthropomorphic horses or half anthropomorphic horses. What's going on? What's the deal, right? Don't you think maybe those are questions that in universe many of the students still wonder, like, how is this happening? I mean, there's a lot more questions than answers. And to me, a crossover movie serving as a sequel or not, but I think could, as a direct-to-video sequel to the theatrical movie we're getting, could make sense. I think that could work. I think as a sequel, what I'm trying to say is, as a sequel to the upcoming movie being released on direct-to-video, I think this would serve good as a sequel, the story. Because it would, like I say, it would answer a lot of questions. It would probably fill up some plot holes that have been left open, as well as it potentially could give fans what they've been wanting. And that's to finally have Sunset Shimmer go back to Equestria and reunite with Princess Celestia. It could give them that finally. And that itself would be worthy of a movie as well, because that would be a long time coming. And we could finally, like I say, find out how these worlds are somewhat connected to each other. You know, I said one time in my reply video to Toon Critic's video that he did on Celestia having visions of the future. My thought, I mentioned there in my reply video, what if Celestia went into the human world herself, met her human equivalent of herself, let her in on what was going on, maybe bestowed upon her some of her magic, so that just in case of emergency, or just in case of emergency or last minute precaution, she could use it if she had to. You see, these are questions and stuff people would want the answers to. They'd want to know how, why, when, it's like, how is this happening? Why is this happening? Is there, does the human Celestia know about has the human Celestia known about this the whole time? Stuff like that. People would want to know. And I think a potential movie serving as a sequel, if not a direct-to-video sequel to the theatrical movie, I think could be, a way to go. I really do. Another idea that I came up with, and I thought about that could potentially be good as a sequel, and it could serve either as a direct-to-video sequel or a theatrical sequel when you think about it, is the main six being called upon to search out successors, to search out those to pass the torch, basically pass the torch to carry on the elements of harmony and the rainbow power. In other words, the other story idea I came up with is a passing of the torch deal. In other words, the main six would be told that they have done everything they can, that they have accomplished everything, they have done and accomplished everything they could as the bearers of the elements of harmony and the rainbow power, that now the time has come for them to find their successors, find those that they feel are worthy, basically find who they feel have proven themselves and are worthy of being the new bearers of the elements of harmony and the rainbow power. In other words, what characters would be worthy of carrying the elements of generosity, honesty, loyalty, laughter, kindness, and friendship, magic, if you will, who would be loyal in that, who would be worthy of those elements and the rainbow power that came with them. And I think, honestly, that could serve as a great story, for a sequel to this upcoming film, whether it be direct-to-video release or theatrical release. I think that could serve as a great story. Now, the other idea I came up with is the Guardians of Harmony idea. Now, some people say that it's kind of played out, and it was only done to, his toy line was only done to, I guess, attract a certain gender over to the pony side, and it succeeded. Believe me, it succeeded. But that's about it. To me, I look at the fact that if you could, and they even mentioned this. They even mentioned that the only thing it got out of it was a comic book tie-in. And that's true. But if you can do a comic book tie-in to it, why can't you do a movie? And I think this could serve most likely as a direct-to-video sequel, as a movie that, as far as sequels to the upcoming movie on Friday, could serve as a direct-to-video sequel to the film, and be more in line with the series than ever before, even though it's serving as a sequel to the theatrical film. I think honestly it could work if the story is presented right. I think it could work. I really do. And I don't think anybody would really disagree with that, because I think when you take a look at the potential Guardians of Harmony storyline could have, or Guardians of Harmony story could have, not just from a series perspective, but from a movie perspective, I don't think you can go wrong. I really don't. I really don't think you can go wrong. I think it could work. I think people would get a kick out of it. Like I said, I think it could work. I think people would get a kick out of it. And it could probably do better, I will admit this, as a direct-to-video sequel to the My Little Pony movie than a theatrical one. I will admit that. However, the other story, the final story I came up with that could serve both ways, is a story where we would see the return of Tirek. Yeah, we would see the return of Tirek, but it would be at the hands of this generation's take on the witches from Generation 1. The witches from the original My Little Pony movie, the witches from the original My Little Pony G1 series. It would be the return of Tirek. What I'm saying is that the other story I came up with, is we could see the return of Tirek thanks to this generation's incarnation of the witches. We could see that. The witches from Generation 1. We could see that, and it could work. But the reason I say we could see his return because of them is also that together they can do something that I think a lot of fans would be okay with. They would align themselves with the Storm King. Yeah, they would align themselves with the Storm King. Now, I'm not saying anything about what the outcome for the Storm King is going to be in the movie, even though we pretty much have an idea already. I'm not going to give away anything until the movie's out. But yeah, basically I could see a story where they help power back, where the witches, mostly the lead witch, the witch mother, uses the powers to kind of strengthen Tirek just enough that he can drain the powers of other ponies or other magical beings, of other magical beings and all that, and then later on align themselves with the Storm King, and they can align themselves with the Storm King, and then you could have the main 6 or 7, depending on if you want to add a certain other unicorn in there. You can have them have a new power bestowed upon them, or you can have them try to unlock a new power that they would have to use to stop Tirek, the witches, and the Storm King from taking over, if not destroying, Equestria. And to me, a story like that can serve either way as far as a sequel can go. It could serve either as a theatrical sequel or as a direct-to-video sequel. That's how I look at it. I'm not saying that it can't do good. It can't be a success, because I think it can be. I really do. I really do. So, when you look at these potential story ideas that I've given for a sequel to the upcoming My Little Pony movie coming out Friday, for a potential sequel, you have two that I mentioned that could serve as direct-to-video sequels. I think that being the Guardians of Harmony deal, and what was the other one? Oh yeah, the crossover with the Equestria Girls finally trying to find out the connection between both worlds. Those two could serve as mostly direct-to-video sequels to the My Little Pony movie. But the other two that I mentioned, the passing of the torch deal, finding successors who have proven themselves unworthy of the element of being the new bearers of the elements of harmony and rainbow power, as well as the one I just mentioned, where you would have the return of Tirek alongside this incarnation's version of the G1 witches from the original G1 film and series, and having them align with the Storm King, that would have them align themselves with the Storm King to the point that you would have the main 6 or 7 either be bestowed with a new power or have to unlock a new power in magic to try and stop this new alliance of evil. So those two potentially could serve as either theatrical or direct-to-video, where the other two I could see as direct-to-video. But those are just my thoughts on if a sequel gets released, how I think it should be released, and what kind of stories we could get out of it. So that's all I'm going to say on it, folks. Let me know what you think down below. Comment if you like. I got to get back into work. I got to try to get something to eat real quickly. But let me know what you guys think. Do you agree with any of my ideas? I'll provide a link to one of the forums so you can check it out yourself. I'll even try to add in what I said in the description box. But let me know what you guys think down below. Comment if you like, and I'll talk to y'all later.